So a friend of mine, Brandon, had a wonderful Gretsch guitar that I was involved with, helping him get pinstriped. That kind of piqued my interest in the Gretsch guitar family, the guitars they produced. Gretsch, as a musical instrument manufacturing company, has been around crafting musical instruments since 1883. That kind of dovetailed right into the kind of work I'm doing, as many of the techniques go all the way back to that period. Gretsch is associated with a famous guitar player, Chet Atkins, of the 50s and 60s, kind of a guitar virtuoso who was able to do some incredible things with the Gretsch guitar. Real unique sound, some finger picking, all of which kind of tied in with Gretsch as a guitar company. Some famous players of guitars include George Harrison, John Lennon of the Beatles, Bo Diddley, Elvis Presley, Bono, and Brian Setzer of the Stray Cats. The Gretsch pin pictured here was something that Brandon had, and it kind of gave me the idea to recreate this as an anniversary piece in glass using glass embossing techniques. As with most of my pieces, I started out with a detailed drawing. I do a pencil rendering, and that helps me work out some of the details in terms of the processes I'm going to use, the order that I layer them in, and the effects that will be created. Once the pencil sketch is satisfactory, I'll digitize the piece and use a vector-based format to create various stencils that I'll have cut out of vinyl to use in the processes. Originally I hand cut a lot of these, but I've been fortunate to get myself a plotter, and now that does most of the work. Even though the plotter does a lot of the work in cutting the stencil, I have to very carefully weed out the fine detail. It's a bit of a tedious process, but that's a whole lot easier than if I had to hand cut these. I'm able to get some very elaborate details. The vinyl has to be kind of precisely set up on the glass so that everything registers correctly. Once the piece is cut and weeded, I use a backing material called a transfer paper to hold all the elements in the appropriate position so I can transfer them directly to the glass. It can be a little bit like fly paper, so I use a holder and some squeegees to get it down flat on it. Once I have the transfer paper squeegeed to the background, I'll cut it to shape, apply it to the glass, and then remove the transfer paper, leaving behind the detailed area of the stencil that I'm going to work on initially. Okay, once I've got the stencil precisely positioned and adhered to the glass, the first technique that I'm going to use is brilliant cutting. It requires me to precisely mark the areas that I'm going to engrave into the glass. I use an etching marker, which is a permanent way to do that. I'm moving over to my handmade cutting bench. I'll select the appropriate cutting wheel, install it into the cutting lathe, and create some shapes that are referred to in the trade as a punty. It's a parabolic half circle, which actually will bend and reflect light when it's done. For this, I use a diamond cutting wheel, and it's kind of a primitive technique of 2 points that go into a hardwood, and they create a bearing of sorts. However, it's very precise. I can get an exact speed. When the diamond wheel is submerged in water, I look through the glass position it exactly where I want, and then looking through the glass, begin to cut. Cutting is not fast, it has to be done precisely, and the marks that I initially make guide me in cutting the shape. Once I've satisfied with the cuts, I'll polish those and then move on to the next procedure. Here I'm using a mixture of mica flakes and hydrofluoric acid for a process known as acid etching. This will give me a very fine stipple effect that's actually burned into the glass by the hydrofluoric acid. Because it's so dry here in Colorado, I cover those areas with a saran wrap. Once the area has been etched with the hydrofluoric acid, I'll neutralize it with a solution and then scrub and wash the residual acid and mica from the surface of the glass. Okay, with the first step completed, the next thing I'm doing is preparing the surface by removing areas of the stencil and allowing them to be exposed to a sandblast technique. There's two elements here. One of the areas is a deep sandblast, which I'll use in the letters to form a carved shape for the word Gretsch. And then the other area is where the texture of the glass is created for a process called glue chipping. In these areas, I'll apply a liquid, heated animal protein glue and control the drying of it. Once the glue dries, it adheres to those sandblasted areas and creates a frost-like chipped pattern where it literally breaks and chips the glass away from the surface. So I carefully apply the glue using a squeeze bottle. It needs to be about 1 to 2 mil for it to chip properly. Kind of do it by feel and eye. I make sure the glass is on a very level surface so that it does not run off to one side of the glass. Once I've filled those areas, I allow it to set up like a gelatin, then go around the areas of the mask very carefully with a knife to then remove the area outside of the mask that I am not going to chip. Once the glue is chipped, it creates a frost-like pattern, allowing me to go to the next phase where I'm chemically silvering using silver nitrate to create a silver mirror. This will enhance the elements of the glue chip and give it a silver backing. The process is an old chemical process. It's a bit like magic. It involves pouring a sensitizer and then the silver nitrate. Once it's deposited, I rinse it from the surface carefully and then neutralize that with distilled water as well. After the silver is dried, I back up those areas and then move on to the next procedure. That is going to be using an oil-based size to lay down gold leaf. So using a quill, I brush down a thin layer of oil-based size, allow it to reach the appropriate tack, and then press in some patent leaf, 23 karat gold, into the areas Once those areas have been covered, I pound it in, remove the loose gold with a large soft brush, and then I'll give it a slight burnish. After that burnish, I'll do a process called engine turning. I've created a number of my own tools for this process. These involve using a period velvet and turning small circles to create a texture. I use these tools to create this unique pattern of the gold, complementing the texture left behind by the silvering. At this point, I'll start to build the background. I decided to use a blended background, so I'll use 3 colors of green on one and 3 colors of red on the other. These colors are applied using quills and then stippled from behind to blend them carefully so you get a transition of color from a light mid-tone to a shadow value. I made my own easel here, which allows it to tilt back and forth so I could look at the surface while working. The inspiration for the color patterns for both of these guitars follow George Harrison's and Bono's guitar. These are both unique, one-of-a-kind, bespoke glass pieces. They use multiple techniques of brilliant turning, gilded in 23 karat gold leaf, chemically silvered, and hand framed.